Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Fireside Chat on delivering business resilience with automation at scale. Before I invite my co-panelists for a chat, a quick word on the topic for discussion and its relevance in today's business environment. Enterprises today have been forced to relook at their business models and challenge status quo as a result of the ongoing COVID pandemic. How do organizations continue to manage business operations, safeguard their people, safeguard their assets, and still manage to stay strong to their purpose, strong to their vision, and continue to thrive rather than just looking to survive? Business resilience has been in more focus today than ever before, and striking gaps have surfaced as enterprises have taken a closer look at their business models. As a result, focus is shifting towards leveraging technology for building and strengthening resilience. Technologies like automation and artificial intelligence are playing a major part in this reimagination of ways of working. Logically, it makes sense, isn't it, that a technology like automation that makes businesses more efficient, reduces or removes human dependence on processes and improves quality will be at the forefront as organizations refocus on resilience. We believe that adoption of automation at scale will be the main differentiator between the thrivers and survivors. And to really talk about this topic of building business resilience with automation, I have two esteemed guests with me who are going to join me in the panel today. We have Arvind Subramanian, who is the Senior Vice President and Head of Accounting Operations at Philips. Arvind comes with over 25 plus years of progressive experience in financial operations and executive management for diverse businesses across medical device, finance, and public accounting industries. Arvind is currently in a leadership position, heading accounting operations for Philips Healthtech, spread over multiple locations, both captive and third party. Welcome, Arvind. We also have Craig Leclerc, who is the Vice President and Principal Analyst at Forrester Research. Craig is an internationally recognized expert in automation, artificial intelligence, and the future of work. His technology coverage area includes robotic process automation, AI solutions in financial services, and the potential workforce disruption due to these technologies. Arvind and Craig, welcome to the panel and look forward to the discussion today. So jumping in straight and having a chat with the panel today, Craig, let's just get an industry view on automation and where it is headed today. So what, according to you, are the what are the key developments that will define the future of RPA?
Yeah, well, thank you, Atul, and it's great to be on this panel. There really are 6 or 7 things that I'm writing in a paper, but I'll just hit 3. I think the market will be defined on how well RPA can become an orchestration capability for linking diverse automations. So an automation like conversational intelligence or machine learning management, being able to combine that with the task automation. The architecture of RPA solutions and platforms are really, really good at that, but they need to evolve to be able to do that better. I think secondly, we have to solve this bot maintenance problem that, there have been so many bots produced so quickly, and they're very sensitive to changes in applications. So we need to have some more advanced technology applied to understand those changes and actually make those corrections inside the bot script. The third area I'll mention is just this whole area of digital worker analytics, which is basically recording humans interacting with machines and synthesize those recordings. It might be across 100 desktops, and trying to understand exactly what is the variation, maybe unwarranted, that's occurring in the process, and how is the human really, we have to, the success of all of this automation is going to be how do we bring humans in the loop in the best way. So any analytics that we can provide to give us more insight in how humans are interacting with machines can address impending issues of anxiety, unpredictability, black box issues, bias issues. All those issues really can be understood better if we apply the right human input and output analytics. I'll stop there, but I could talk for longer.
No, thanks a lot, Craig. And we have seen the same thought process with most of our clients as well, right? I think we saw that initial race of Me Too kind of thing. We also have to do something around the bot. And as the bot real estate has grown in most organizations, the entire bot maintenance and the human plus bot coexistence has obviously started to come back into question. So thanks for sharing your inputs on that, Craig. Arvind, jumping on to you, you have had a very successful RPA program running in Philips. Would you like to walk us through the journey? How did you go about picking up the first initial set of use cases? How did you create the roadmap? Just walk us through what you really did.
Sure. Thanks, Atul. I think the digital roadmap was integral for finance, right? So I think we started, and this was baked in our Hoshin strategy. Hoshin is a tool we use for strategic planning within Philips, including for finance functions. So we baked this in somewhere in 2015, if I'm not mistaken. But 2015, we as Philips, we were going through big finance transformation, including outsourcing, consolidating in a centralized environment with captive organization, and driving standardization. So all those fun things we were going through. 2017 is when we said we want to bring in automation as a next step. And that's also when we interacted with Assistage, and we got that collaboration working. 2018, 2019, and 2020 was the 3 years where we said, we put an ambitious target of saying, okay, we want to deliver a 1 million work of automation as a stick on the ground. And we started working towards it. And 2017, last 2 quarters where, we were excited with the RPA program, and we started working on task automation, and we picked up easy, low-hanging fruits, and we very quickly started working on those. We had to take a big pause, right? So in first quarter 2018, we said, this is not going to work, and this is not going to get us to where we want to be. So to answer your question, the initial pick on use cases were the typical rule-based, easy to pick tasks in the back office functions that we automated. But then what happened was very quickly we realized we started automating waste, right? So typically in a finance R2R function, anything that goes wrong in the upstream process, we were very good in processing JVs and those kind of things. So we started automating those areas, which was not very productive. And in the lean definition is a waste. So we pulled the hand on, and first quarter 2018, we went back onto the drawing board and said, how do we get that more structurally done? And that's where we also zeroed on looking at processes from an end-to-end perspective, and look at it more with the lens of how we can standardize, eliminate, and how do we leverage the existing technology. And we said RPA is going to play a role on the white spots that we still have, and it should not be RPA should be leading the automation. So that was a very fundamental shift which we had to make. But then we are very much in course with our ambition to what we wanted to deliver on. But that was a fundamental change in our approach, the first quarter of 2018.
Thanks for sharing that, Arvind. And it's been a phenomenal journey, right? I think a lot of learnings as well during this entire last 3 years of implementation. Craig, jumping to you, we have seen the RPA market evolve over the last few years, right? From pure play, dumb automation, doing a task level automation, people talking about intelligent automation, etc. Really see the future of RPA market likely to be, in the next 2 to 3 years?
Yeah, that's something we think about a lot at Forrester. It was pretty easy in 2015 when we first started covering the market There were a small number of specialist companies that no one ever heard of that were doing very specific things around surface automation and so forth. It was an easy market to cover. But what's happened is with the acceleration of the interest in it and its viability, it's essentially become a part of almost every aspiring workflow transformation platform provider that's in the market. So if you're doing any kind of digital transformation as a software company, you're going to need to have task automation as part of that portfolio. So the market's gotten very, very diverse. You're going to have probably 3 what we call the alpha vendors that were the early movers. That'll take probably 30–40% of the market. But then you're going to have these intelligent automation platforms, which there may be 50 that we've identified right now, that have RPA, but also maybe have digital process automation or BPM, and they might have some conversational intelligence, and they might have other components that are all part of intelligent automation. And they're coming into the market, and they're arguing, with some justification that, RPA is too tactical. You really need to transform a lot of processes. You need to have a philosophy of continuous improvement. And we've been doing that end-to-end orchestration and continuous improvement for decades, right? So it's more than just task automation. And then you have domain specialists that are emerging. I've been reviewing companies that are coming in just to do RPA in logistics, or RPA in test automation, or RPA in insurance. So you're going to have a faction there. The Chinese market has just awakened with RPA, where that was extremely quiet. And now you have Alibaba and a handful of startups getting money in China to go into this market as well. So instead of this nice clean map, you've got this assortment of different markets. And then you have what I call the low-code platforms, which would be like the Service Traces of the world and the Salesforce of the world. And basically any software stack that is focused on workflow transformation will probably be buying into this market or including this at some point in the future. And then the big wild card, of course, is Microsoft, with their license footprint power that they have in the market. They just made an acquisition to augment their internal development. And, they're going to, as part of the Power Automate platform, it's which we say is an intelligent automation platform. And they're going to, even if they stumble, will be successful in taking 5 to 7 or 8% of the market over time. So we see a very diverse market that's developing.
It's really coming up, right? I think different kind of players with some unique offerings, bringing in different technology elements as well, bringing in different flavors of the industry that they want to focus on. Yeah, it's really emerging as a very interesting space. Absolutely correct. So Arvind, during your experience in implementing RPA for Philips, what were some of the most interesting lessons that you learned during this period? Was it a smooth ride or something really took you by surprise and you had to really change the course? What was your really experience around the challenges that you faced?
Yeah, I would say we are still learning because it's always, when you embark on such journey, it's lots of ups and downs. I think there are a lot of learnings, and I would also probably combine this with some of the critical success factors which helped us to get through the initial phase, right? So I think what was probably most critical, I would put it as a top success factor, was leadership commitment and ownership. Right. I mean, it came right from our CFO that, we need to move in this direction, and digitalization is going to be integral for our success. Right? So that was probably the most important element. And it was not just a statement, right? It was more of, as I said, he just said 1 million work hours of automation. And that was at that point in time, we had no clue whether it's less, more, left or right. But it was a commitment that was given, and it was baked into our 5-year plan. And it was not just a 5-year plan, it was translated into our AOPs and whatnot. But what it helped us was to ring fence the cost that we need to invest on, but also kept everyone down the line accountable to deliver on what needs to be delivered on, right? So it was not a choice whether you do it or not, or can you do it as a pastime, but it was something that you have committed, and it was big savings, which was all baked in. So we had to make this work. So that really puts us in a position where you don't say, whether we can do it or not, it was how we can do it. So that is a completely different perspective across the mindset. And then translating that down the organization was critical. I think the second biggest learning for us from the 6 months, as I said, was a very bumpy ride, was to strengthen governance, because RPA is one topic which connected our outsourcing partners. There was Infosys, the platform provider, that's EdgeVerve, our own GBS captive environment, and the IT infrastructure and security that we had in Philips. And of course, we had to also, most of these processes almost touched areas which was outside finance. Therefore, we had to get Q&R approval as well, quality and regulatory approval, which is an integral part of the medtech industry we are in. So it was very critical for us to set up a governance where all these domains collaborated, and we made sure that it was a seamless workforce. So we had to really lay out what is going to be operational governance, what is going to be the steering committee, how the escalations needs to work, etc., so that the whole thing was almost sounded very administrative, and we kind of pushed it in the back burner initially, had to be strengthened to really make it work. The other critical learning we had was, as I alluded earlier, we started immediately picking up the low-hanging fruits and started automating. And that was not, very quickly we realized, people where we had a target and everybody had a, objective in mind that they need to figure out, and then they immediately started automating whatever they didn't like to do, right? And that created a lot of waste automation. So we had to really pull back and said, okay, we'll call this as a RPA program, so the program around automation, but let's look at this holistically as an end-to-end process and see what is going wrong and where do we have the biggest commitment in terms of resources, waste, etc. And then we strategically going back on, if we say that, okay, if we do this, is it a waste? And why do we do this? And where is exactly the problem? So asking the 5 Is. So we came up with this ESA concept of, first eliminate if it's not required, and simplify or standardize the process, and then simplify the process, and then see if you have white spots. And then the automation part comes in. And then the automation parts also, we really set down the design principle saying, if you can get it done through the existing ERP landscape, do it. And then we have a whole lot of applications which surrounds the ERP landscape. And we wanted to get the maximum functionality, get it done out of those applications. Only if we have a white spot still remaining, we used RPA as a potential automation opportunity. And what it did was it kind of came in between the white spots, really, I say, and I think Craig alluded this as an orchestration. I think that's exactly where it needs to play a role, right? It needs to connect those areas where it connects the applications, the ERP, etc., and it almost came in as a glue to create a seamless automation flow across the process. But we need to go through this ESA mechanism to really get there. And this meant that we spend more time not really jumping into programming, but really going through the process and really figuring out where we want to do the automation. So that was a very important learning as well. And of course, last but not the least, we had to set up a lot of structural change management process, including upgrading the skills of the people, right? We had to set up a lot of training curriculum where HR played a very important role, succession planning, hiring the right resources to make this work from externally, since we didn't have enough firepower inside. So I think all this was an important learning, but also a very critical success factor to where we are today.
Very, very, very interesting insights, Arvind. Because I think we underplay the importance of governance and executive sponsorship a lot of times, right? I think in making some of these programs successful, these can be almost treated as a technology platform coming into play, but it's much, much more beyond that, which requires a proper change management. So very interesting thoughts, Arvind. Thanks for sharing that. But Craig, what are you seeing in the industry, right? Arvind referred to these low-hanging fruits and almost wastage, I mean, automating the wastage itself, right? What are your thoughts? Are you seeing the same trend happening in the industry now as well, when people are starting their automation journeys, or it's a much more aggressive, let me bring in the AI and automation all together? Are you seeing that change in trend, or are you seeing a similar trend?
Yes. So let me just respond to something Arvind said, which I think is really, really important aspect, is this notion of having a process to look to standardize a process before automation. You know, what we're finding is it's just a lot of unneeded variation in a lot of tasks, and there's a rush to automate, a rush to program bots. And if you just can get the number of steps that are done by everybody up from 18% to 22%, it can make a much more sustainable automation. So great point, Arvind. You know, the report I just put out was really about how your intelligent automation roadmap has just been jolted, and your psychology has been jolted. And I think the psychology is actually the more important point, that prior to the pandemic, there were a lot more transformational projects on the roadmap. And now that we're clearly going into a recession that'll be probably L-shaped, I'm not buying the V story. You know, it's going to do like all recessions have had the last three. It's going to focus on cost, you know, issues. About a third of the companies that we interact with are in some level of not survival, but just trying to you know, keep the ship afloat during these times, which are really, really hurting oil and gas in some of the industries. Certainly hospitality, transportation, and so forth is a lot harder. What we're seeing is the psychology change in terms of looking at more pragmatic, more practical, you know, more get it done now. We've seen examples of, you know, airlines, you know, put in bots that are, you know, able to handle cancellation requests really, really rapidly and do it in 6 days. You know, this is a psychology that wasn't there before the pandemic. So the combination of this shift towards what we call the acceleration zone for things like remote business. I mean, you know, there are a lot of companies that we have banks, 2,000 banks in the US that don't have remote deposit, you know. We've had more inquiries about electronic signature, you know, and things that were pretty mature technologies that now have been, you know, risen. Now it's about getting to higher percentages of e-delivery adoption because I don't want to make my customers sick, you know. You know, so this real change in all technology and automation that supports remote business, customer onboarding in new ways, you know, that supports work from home. You know, it's not just adding more VPN licenses and checking your cloud bandwidth. I mean, you're not going to have, you know, we think there'll be 10 million people that will not return to a traditional office just in the US. You know, that'll be the steady state once we get through this, whatever that means. So that's going to change how we manage people, how we understand what they're doing. You know, there are all kinds of issues that are going to stem from that, and automation is a big part of that. Digital muscles that we've developed in these last few months are just amazing to see. I never thought I'd see it in my work time, you know, just in terms of the online shopping, in terms of the, you know, the use of collaboration technologies, the use of even business intelligence and reporting and so forth. So we need a new set of metrics. And I think a lot of this digital worker analytics and this sort of understanding what humans are doing will help in creating a really diminished middle management that depended a lot on human interaction. It's going to have to move to more data management. And some of that has to be under governance and operating management, because it can be introduce problems of data privacy and so forth. But that's where it's got to go. So that's what we're seeing, emphasis on remote business, on remote work, and RPA task automation, and these very pragmatic combinations of AI and automation technologies.
Interesting. Thanks. And you brought a relevant point around the current pandemic and how the economy will shape up. But Arvind, is there something that you could find a direct benefit of having been as part of your RPA program? So when the pandemic hit us, did the automation program help you in any way?
Yeah, I mean, the answer is yes, 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 and yes, right? So I think we kind of, you know, when we talk about it, you know, we didn't plan for the pandemic, right? Nobody planned for it. The automation had its own journey, and pandemic happened. So we kind of had to react significantly for the pandemic situation. And you can only look back and you know, we can pat ourselves in the back that we started this journey earlier, because to that extent, the effort that we need to put into be ready for this BCP situation was lesser, right? And was easier. We had our business continuity plans all, you know, very much figured to the last detail, but it was all based on regions backing up another region, or a system failing, another system helping. But nobody planned for this situation that we encountered early this year. And that was literally, I mean, that put us on a, you know, blue litmus test for all our BCPs. We went out of the window. And we had to basically, from one day to another, bring almost, you know, 700 odd people from office working people into a remote working environment with IT security, with vast applications, and a whole lot of things that we need to do it. And, you know, any kind of automation that we managed to do until then, you know, helped us immensely, because that many less number of individuals we need to worry about IT infrastructure, security control, knowledge management, more importantly, and the backup support, right? And backup for people falling sick. So, you know, you almost had a ratio. Of course, we had new set of people who had to monitor bot, et cetera, but that was much more different skill sets, different population, and different volume of people who could easily manage that. So yes, it was an immense help, and you don't realize it when you take that for granted. But what the journey has really underlined is we just have to go through it much more rigorously in the next couple of years, because all the pundits are really saying that this is not something that, you know, you can expect something like this every second year or so, right? So this just underlines the importance of automation and the need for making us more resilient in this environment.
Thanks for sharing that, Arvind. And Craig, as you alluded to this earlier, right? Organizations are trying to scale up their automation, and it's becoming more relevant now. So what are some of the pitfalls, or is there a golden mantra for success for automation program?
Yeah, I mean, for an RPA program in general, is that a question? Yeah. Yeah, we just published a paper called The 10 Golden Rules. I didn't like the title, but that's sort of, you know, of RPA success. You know, and really, I think we've talked about a lot of them. You know, I think you have to create the right operating model and governance around it. Arvind just talked about how they did that at Philips. You know, but things like security are very important issues. Having a design authority that is able to just determine whether RPA is the right automation for a particular use case. We're seeing it misapplied in a lot. You know, you know, having a design, you know, having a control framework that, you know, as you distribute design and development capability to the business, which is for about 80% of the operating models we see, that's the goal. The stronger you need a technology management, a control framework. that is ensuring the appropriate coding standards, the design authority I mentioned, security, penetration, and analysis, and so forth. So you need, a governance structure that is not just focused on the risks, which are very, very important, but also on how do I surface ideas from the business? How do I do ideation and get that sticker that's on some whiteboard into a process that allows stages to actually vet that, to understand it, to do a business case, ultimately get it into development and standardization and the digital workarounds and so forth. But that's a very important aspect to scale as well. And the companies that are really doing well with this have built an internal process like that. I'll stop there, Arvin. Yeah, I'm sorry, Tool.
Yep, thanks for sharing your thoughts, Craig, and Arvind as well. And clearly, I think looking at the future, Craig, you're bringing the industry experience, and Arvind, your own experience of having done it in Philips. Very clear, right? I think that if there's a method to the madness, if there's a proper governance, thought process planning done, I think you can make these RPA programs successful, right? I mean, you can scale the automation programs and really make the true value come out of these programs. So thanks for sharing your thoughts, Arvind and Craig. And Heather, how are we doing with time now?
Hi, we're doing well. We definitely have time for some Q&A, but before that, I want to check in with our sketch artist. Remember, everybody, I showed you that and when we first started, and here we go. A little look at what he's been drawing since the session's been going on. I think he just drew some governance filling in that little remote control, which is awesome. So this sketch is going to be available at EdgeVerve's booth. When it's completed in a little while after the session, you've got to go to their booth to download this pictograph. So we do have, again, like I said, some questions. Oh, shoot. Yeah, we do have some questions, but I also wanted to remind everybody we do have a poll next to the chat box. We do have a poll, so please make sure that you click on the poll right there to answer that. So now I am going to jump to our Q&A. We have a few in our chat box, and everybody remember, if you have questions you want for this panel, please make sure you type it in the chat box. So the first question is first it starts with a compliment to Arvind. So well done, Arvind. It is great information from Arvind. Could you talk more about incorporating RPA into continuous improvement and lean, in particular the SSA approach? And he put a question mark around SSA, so I guess he wasn't sure if that was the abbreviation.
Yeah, sure. Are you able to hear me okay, Heather?
Yep, perfectly.
Okay. Yeah, so thanks for the compliments. So we do have, so the SSA is actually ESSA, it's ESSA, that's elimination, standardization, simplification, and automation. So for me, these are not two different elements, right? So when we wanted to do RPA, and the first 6 months, as I said, we had challenges. The learning was, we were trying to automate a piece of what we thought is an opportunity, but typically automation is the last part. You need to really look at the process from an end-to-end perspective and see how we can improve on it. And that's where the ESSA concept or the lean helps us with the methodology to really look at it structurally. And that's where when we looked at it end-to-end process, we basically first started driving standardization and simplification. And when the automation piece was ready, we basically looked at the white spots and started using RPA where it made sense. So from that perspective, I think lean is an ingredient or a critical component to really deploy RPA as an effective strategy.
Well, I have another question for you, and it's directed at Arvind again. Arvind, you said that people automated what they didn't like to do. Are your business subject matter experts building the RPA, or do you have a separate automation team that do the builds for the SMEs?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So we had very distinctly separate teams, right? So the teams who are building RPA are really the people who know the programming well and were kind of on the back end. So they were not the SMEs, because these were Initially, we didn't have those resources even in-house. So the SMEs were looking at the processes and were kind of driving our design principles to improve on the standardization and locate the areas where automation can be done, and then designing how the automation should work. And then they were the ones sitting with the coders, if I may call it, or the RPA programmers to really translate that into the right kind of coding. So these were distinctly separate teams, and the implementation, or rather the coding, was more, we use EdgeVerve and Infosys to help us with that resourcing.
Atul, Craig, do you have any commentary you want to add to that, or I'll move on to the next question?
No, I think thanks for that, Gordon, and sorry, Heather. And very clearly, right, as Arvind pointed out, the coding part was where the Infosys and EdgeVerve teams collaborated with Philips to make sure that the automation's RPA program worked, and the subject matter expertise was being brought by the Philips. But we have seen different variations across different clients. But this is a model that we have seen, when replicated well, just leads to successful programs. So yeah, this is a successful model that we have seen in multiple installations.
All right, I have another question. So for Craig, with cost takeout and resilience taking the center stage, how are enterprises shifting gears and redrawing their automation roadmap?
Yeah, and I think I talked a little bit about this earlier, but it's a cost takeout world right now as we move into this recession. The lens, though, is how do I improve remote business, and how do I improve work from home? So these are automation priorities for companies. Many don't have basic things they need to work in a non-face-to-face world, and that's remote business. So anything to do with that, and that might involve things like electronic signatures and basic automations that maybe were on the table for years, but now are getting accelerated. So there is that shift towards these very, very practical, very fundamental things that are needed for where we are. And of course, the sacrifice is the more transformational projects that maybe have had a lot of executive support that have been more transformational, more AI based. So maybe you were building a modernization approach to new channel management or new customer experience orchestration, using some of the latest marketing analytics. Well, maybe those are getting losing a little bit of steam. So this is pretty typical of recessions. But I think this one has a particularly interesting character, an unfortunate character, related to doing fundamental business things that we always assumed we could get done in other ways.
Great. All right, so we have another question. It's a long one, so bear with me. How do you handle some of the bots that were built early that automated waste or weren't built with best practices that you have implemented now? Are those bots retired once you got back and review the process more fully, or are you doing rework to bring older bots up to current best practices?
Yeah, this is a terrific question. So I think this is, in a life cycle, it's a continuous process, right? So as I said, we to answer the question straightforward, I think we retired the old ones, which were kind of eliminating waste. And we started programs to really structurally look at the processes end to end. But this is also, as we evolve in our ERP journey or in the where we improve the functionality of the applications that are surrounding our processes, this is a continuous process, right? So we go back onto the bots to really say, are they still relevant, yes or no? Even the bots which were developed on mature processes keep changing because of the business processes keep improving, the applications keep improving, the ERP landscapes we keep improving. So some of them become redundant. So I always say these are areas which we continuously review it and retire and develop new bots as it deem necessary in those spaces.
Anyone else want to take that, or do you want me to move on to the next question?
I would just add to that that there's also constant upgrading to the core platforms, the RPA platforms, which often require you to rebuild the robots because a lot of the transitions are not as smooth as we would like yet. Getting better, but not not as smooth as we'd like. I think, Heather, you can go to the next question.
Will do. All right, so this is for Atul. EdgeVerve, as we know, works with a lot of organizations on scaling their automation programs. What would you say are some of the most commonly encountered challenges?
Well, some of the challenges that Arvind mentioned as part of his brief in terms of the challenges and the best practices that they use within Philips are pretty relevant across the board as well, right? The top three that would come to my mind, first and foremost, is the entire concept of automating the waste. There has to be a proper due diligence done in terms of selecting the right processes to automate. So the process discovery is a key element to make the entire automation program successful, and this reduces the waste of process automation to a large extent. The second is around the entire executive sponsorship and governance, and this is also something Arvind alluded to earlier, which is around, for example, if you look at Philips, he mentioned how it was being driven by their CFO. And we have often seen that successful RPA programs, which have moved from pilots into scalable automation programs and been successful in terms of delivering the true value, have had a very strong executive sponsorship and have had built a very strong governance layer as to how you track the value being delivered out of the program. And third, which refers to the entire scalability aspect, which the question alludes to, is really around looking at platforms, the selection of platforms which can provide you with the scale, really looking at a platform choice which moves beyond the bells and whistles and focuses on providing the scalability beyond the initial pilot phases. So typically, Heather, I would say that these are the three big areas that we have seen: a right selection in terms of the processes, executive sponsorship and governance, and the right selection of the technology platform, the RPA platform itself, are some of the key success factors that we have seen in RPA programs.
I have another question just came in. How will the automation change the map for GBS and shared service center locations and process transitions route? I don't really understand the last part of that, but you probably get it better than me.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Map of GBS SSE locations. I'm not sure. It's too early for me to comment on that. But for us, I think the key aspect when we say automation, we suddenly see SSE and GBS disappearing completely out of the blue. That's not the case, right? So we also kind of try to move the competence of what we do in GBS or in SSE to the next level, right? So the focus of what we've been doing moves from very transactional to rule-based to judgment-based. I think we are also challenging our own beliefs in terms of what can be done in shared service now, and saying, okay, why can't we do that, right? So it's also a question of upgrading your talent to do that, to do more interesting stuff in these locations. So I think what we traditionally believed we can do in GBS and SSE is also getting challenged, and that's basically putting more interesting topics on the table for GBS to embark on. And secondly, it's also with the pandemic, the whole idea of what we believed can be done remotely is also being challenged. Right now, everything is remote. So one can also say, do you really need to be in the close location to be talking about it? Because if it's only a question of time zone, we can still adapt. So it's a question of how do you get, I think the key question, and it will become the main important aspect as well going forward, is what is going to be, where can you really get the talent that you need to deliver on these requirements? And that's going to determine your location. With the automation, we have created more monitoring groups at this point in time, which is still hosted in our GBS and SSE location. to manage this outcome. So I think that's where we are today in our journey, but I see still 4 or 5 years down the line, while the size is questionable, I think it's really going to be a question of where can you resource these talents to do these important activities, not so much of whether it's in GBS or in SSC.
A follow-up to that is, can you see trends related to decentralization? Maybe Craig, you want to jump in on a thought about this?
Well, decentralization meaning, more development and responsibility for this type of automation in the business. I do see that as a trend, if that's what you meant. As this automation gets more intelligent, it gets closer to really the business function and the business rules, and essentially instantiating the what the business does more algorithmically. And it's big words, but what it means is you've got to be closer to the business to be able to develop the next level of automation that becomes more intelligent. So there's going to be more, I think, decentralization of the SMEs and development to move into a more of a federated approach and be closer to the business. Now, that may not apply as well to the traditional business shared services. So if it's invoice processing, if it's accounts receivable, but anything to do with line of business automation is going to move more rapidly in that direction.
All right, so another question on governance. Atul mentioned good governance to track success. Can he provide any example of some of the metrics you would recommend tracking?
Right. So I think when I look at governance, it is beyond metrics as well, right? I think one way to look at it is from a pure play automation program, looking at it from FTE releases, which has often been the case, right? How many person-months of effort can I save by bringing in automation? But the other way to look at it is from a quality metrics. How has it improved my quality? How has my compliance improved in my overall running of the businesses? So there are different matrices that organizations track to see how successful their automation programs are. But really, if you take a step back, what you're looking at is looking at how the automation programs that are running in the organization are obviously bringing in the efficiency, bringing in the effectiveness, and helping the business deliver more than what it used to earlier, right? So I think the governance is really referring to that. Governance also refers to how you are upskilling the people who might get impacted as part of the entire RPA program. There is a huge upskill program that is generally done in successful organizations so that any employee movements as a result of the RPA programs are well taken care of. A governance, a properly run governance actually takes care of that as well. So just rather than looking at pure play metrics from an efficiency and effectiveness, there are these other factors that also come into a governance structure that we always refer to.
I think we have time for just one more question, looking at the clock. Arvind, what would your advice for organizations that are just starting on their automation programs or the ones that have done pilots successfully and wanting to scale? In 2 minutes.
Yeah, so I would say it should be on the leadership agenda, right? So that's number 1, 2, 3 from a priority perspective. And I would say, if you commit big so that there is no escape, right? It's not an afterthought or something on the side. If you really want to make big inroads in, commit big and commit publicly that this is going to be on the agenda. So everybody's neck right from the top to bottom is on the scale. So I think that's going to be crucial, number 1, let's say, ingredient. And the third, I think we talked about it, right? So setting up the governance and making sure that we have a very clear strategy in terms of what we want to automate, define and clearly communicate the design principles under which we are going to execute. I think these are important ones, I would say, from my experience in this journey that are crucial for our success.
All right, well, in the last minute, I'm going to let any of our esteemed panelists jump in with any 20-second last thoughts.
And just to add to what Arvind said, for me, it is always around the process discovery playing a very integral part, right? quite often we have seen automation programs fail because we jump into the entire automation bandwagon and just try and automate too many stuff, and the automation of waste really comes from there. So if there's enough due diligence done in terms of identifying the right processes to automate, that often leads to a successful program. And that also falls under the governance framework that Arvind was referring to.
Well, I want to thank our panelists, Atul, Arvind, and Craig, and EdgeVerve for hosting this phenomenal session. What wonderful questions we had from our audience. Let's take one last check of our sketch artist to see what he was working on, so that everybody can see a look at what we filled in that upper right-hand corner. It's looking really good. I want everybody to remember this is only going to be available for download at EdgeVerve's booth.